We're down your way, da-da-da-da, we're always down your way, da-da-da-da, because I'm down your way, da-da-da-da, I'm always down your way, da-da-da-da, crikey.
And as the theme tune of Downs Your Way fades into the background, it is my great pleasure to welcome to this episode the Birketts.
A brace of Steve Birketts.
Birketts in stereo.
Hello.
Stereo Birkett. So we have Steve Birkett Sr., if you don't mind me calling you that, and Steve
that's
Birkett
fine.
Jr.
Hello.
Hello. And the purpose of this episode is to discuss the actual making of the album Stripped Back. As you will recall from the last episode, we talked to Rebecca about her perspective on it, but we've now come to where most of the magic was done anyway in terms of recording and production, to talk to Steve, who, as you know, has played most of the instrumentation on it, and to Steve Jr., who did the mixing and the mastering. So welcome both.
Hello. Thank you very much. Hello to everybody out there in YouTube land and podcast land, and hello.
Hello, world.
Yes, just to say for the YouTubers, if again this all goes according to plan, there will be a film of this, hopefully capturing the two Steves as much as anything else. We are very tight for space here, so the camera's sort of wedged in the corner. Hopefully the sound's all right. If that particular option doesn't come off, I shall have to cut this bit out again, so I shall now leave a very short gap. Anyway, so Steve, I would like to
Which
ask,
one?
Yeah, okay, good point, well made. Maybe a
Point.
A and B. No, Steve Senior, first of all. I really wanted to ask you, from your perspective, where did the inspiration for doing an album of this type come from? Where was the idea born?
Yeah. Okay, well, we've been doing acoustic stuff like forever. Almost starting off with acoustic stuff and carrying on doing it with supports, and also doing our Pizza Express gigs, which were more or less acoustic. So along the line, there's always been an idea to do an acoustic album. Having said that, this isn't an acoustic album, although obviously acoustic guitar features pretty heavily in it. I didn't want to do just an acoustic album. Not that there's anything completely wrong with them, but it sort of limits you a little bit. And you can tend to be sort of thrashing away at trying to reproduce what you do electrically, and it just doesn't sound sort of good enough. So I thought, well, let's then use some of the ideas that we did when... So what the hell? It's just stress ball.
That's it, lovely little aid. Sorry.
Yeah, that didn't go down well on radio, but Steve's just squeezing a stress ball here for some reason. I don't know why. And yeah, we've also done some streaming type gigs recently, and we've put other sort of loops and whatnot with them. And during those streaming type gigs, people have said, well, are you going to record any of this? And also, are you going to do any other original type stuff like this? So out of all of that was born the idea, yeah, we'll do an album. It's got to be done in lockdown, but that's fine, because I've got everything that we need in here, in this little room, where we are sitting sat. Apart from just one or two things. So it's sort of, let's embrace those limits and see what we can come up with. The main limit being that we haven't got a drum kit in here. There's no room for it. I suppose you could do, but it'd be tricky. And my drumming is pretty rudimentary anyway, so it probably saved you an ear bend in there. So what we've ended up with are versions of the songs that we've already done, and two original songs, which we've stripped down, and sometimes it's funkier, sometimes it's just acoustic, sometimes it's more lush. They've taken on a little life of their own, bless them, each little tune. And I've had a while of a time doing it.
And did of the 10 that are reimagined?
Yes. It's the only word, isn't it?
It's the only word.
Unfortunately.
10 or represented, maybe.
Yeah.
Did they choose themselves, or did you have a wider field that you narrowed down?
There's a couple of them that chose themselves, in that they're songs that we'd already done live, acoustically, and also that we'd done live with some drums and with bass and what have you. Things like Sailing on a Pool of Tears, which we've done acoustically in the past, and had to really reinvent that one. And also the originals ones, let's do with those as well. Those were songs that we'd been knocking around for ages, and were contenders for other albums, but just didn't fit because their feel was just sort of a bit different. But the two that are on it, which is Blues for Us and Washing All Over My Heart, sort of threw themselves out at us. It's like, oh yeah, these would be perfect to go on here. Other ones that we hadn't done live were ones that we'd done in the streaming gigs. And so they chose themselves like that. So yeah, more or less they chose themselves. We could have knocked a couple on the head because I know there are a lot of songs on there, but you don't want to. We enjoyed doing them, so no, we keep them all. They're all our babies.
Well, I've said before on this cast, the two that you chose to bring forward, I mean, have been around for some time, as you've said, but I've had them on my iPod/iPhone, and which often just plays on random, particularly when driving long distances. And of course you forget about them because they're not on the albums, and you kind of forget. And this song comes on, and you think, "Oh, that's good," and then you say, "Oh, hold on a minute, that's Rebecca," and then you say, "Oh yes, it's that one." So I'm really pleased to see them. And Blues for Us, which went out as a single just over a week ago, seems to have got a remarkable amount of traction and love from people.
Good.
There is an amusing story about it, which I will pause to tell at this point, which is that it has found itself on a playlist on Spotify. A genuine playlist, I should say. There's very odd things go on Spotify, don't get me started. But anyway, it's ended up on this playlist, and we were quite interested to see it was there, and we looked into it further, and it's a privately curated playlist with about 100,000 followers, so it's no mean thing, and it's been getting a good number of plays each day. What is curious about it is when you look at this playlist, it's full to the eyeballs of rap and hip hop. Just about every track has the word explicit alongside it.
Oh, right, okay.
If I tell you that the two tracks that follow it come from an album called, I think, something like Goat and then SH Bond T afterwards.
Right, okay.
Wow.
And then, so you've got this stuff which is, of a particular type of music and very much sort of, along the same lines. And then in the middle of it, you've got Rebecca melodically singing about Blues for Us. Anyway, it's on there, which is great. But so it seems to be of, shall we say, broad appeal at the moment.
Excellent. Well, that's one of the things that we thought might happen, because you're sort of tapping a different genres and different feels, aren't you?
So let's talk about the instrumentation, and I'm going to ask a sort of, an ignoramus question here, if you like. But is it possible just to quickly list all the different instruments that feature on the album?
Okay.
So bass, drums, etc. But beyond that.
Okay, so acoustic guitar features pretty heavily on there. Electric guitar, slide guitar features fairly heavily on there. Piano, in one or two songs that are nearly all piano. Organ, and also with Hertz, because we did have one song that was a complete band collaboration where we've got everybody playing. So that's Vince on the bass, and Neil did his drum take, and Aidan did a piano part, and Nigel did an organ part, and I'd already done an organ part to it as well, and then I put a guitar as well. So they're all on there. Harmonica, which I'll talk about later on, is on there. Vocals, and then you've got all of the other instruments that are sort of recreated through samples and what have you. So there's quite a lot of strings on here, which don't feature hardly at all on the rest of our albums. I mean, okay, I'm not sat in here playing a cello, but I'm playing them off a keyboard, so you're getting the strings effect on there.
It's tough getting the orchestra in here.
Yeah, those double basses take up a lot of space. They really do. And I think that's about it. I mean, there are claps on here where Rebecca and myself got together and we literally overlaid loads of claps with ordinary hands and with rubber gloves on, because that seems like a good idea, so you get sort of a deep sound to it.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's that doubling effect. with
Yeah,
the
that's
rubber
right.
gloves.
And next stupid question, if you like, is how do you approach it on a song by song basis? I mean, or is it like a, because I know you work away in here for hours, is it like instrument by instrument, right, today I
Yes.
shall mostly be playing piano, or is it today I shall mostly be working on Hertz? Or
Yeah,
whatever?
it's more like that. Yeah, so you'll be tackling a track. So you'll be
Yeah.
putting down what is the say the key instrument for it. By and large, I'll be getting a drum part down or a loop. We'll talk about looping later on, but you know that loop might be like a stomp and a clap,
Mm.
which is on believe, and that sort of sets the tempo for it all and what have you. And then I'll put down the main instrument that sort of bonds the whole thing together, and then add stuff on top of that. Pianos and well, it might be the piano that bonds it all together, but you know, backing vocals, etc. And by and large, the last thing that goes on there is the main vocal. So you've almost created a karaoke track, and then the final vocal goes on, and then maybe some extra vocals to bolster that up in terms of the backing vocals and harmonies and things. So yeah, that tends to be the way it works. Rather than go through the whole album and go, yeah, I'll wheel in the Steinberg and we'll play the piano parts on there. Yeah.
And how long does it take to produce a track in that way? You know, in terms of, but both really, sort of hours go into it, and also sort of like elapsed days. What?
You know what? It depends.
Mhm.
Something like Blues for Us was one of those songs actually that I'd been playing on acoustic for a while. I actually performed it at one point at an open mic, just on acoustic. And once I got that acoustic part down, the rest of it fell out. So it probably took in writing time a day and a half, and then recording time probably another couple of days after. But that's pretty quick. Other ones take a lot longer. Take a good week to get some of the more advanced and complicated ones together.
And as the producer, how often did you find yourself having recorded it all, sitting down, you know, putting it together and then thinking, not so sure about that, you know, need another take, and then sort of turning to yourself as the player and saying, you know, come on mate, and in another
Well, it's one of the difficult parts about working in here on my own, which is what I was doing, is that you're also having to engineer.
Yeah.
So I'll be putting down, say, an acoustic guitar part, and I'll put it down, or I'll DI it, because I can plug my guitar straight into the Logic that I'm working on. And sometimes that sounds good, and other times it sounds awful. So it's then, okay, we'll get the mics out, and we'll place the mics, and then we'll balance them up, and then we'll try recording it. Oh no, that's a bit too basic. So you're doing the job of an engineer, and by the time you've done all of that, you're doing your editing. That is the most difficult part of it all, really, and getting that sound right. And when we get onto the mixing side of it, one of the things that we noticed is that it's a really difficult thing to mix well, because stuff is so exposed. There's no raging guitar to sort of cover things over, or a drum smashing away. You've got to get things really accurate. So
I think that's just to jump in there, I think that's the kind of thing where really I kind of come into it a little bit as well, having fresh ears on the back of what Dad had done, of just kind of mixing and mastering it and be able to just hear it for what it is, and just kind of go, okay, but have you considered doing, you know, this, for example? And then we sort of go, oh no, I hadn't thought about it in that kind of way, or, you know, giving almost that kind of fresh take on things of how things sound as well. And as we'll talk about in a bit as well, there's some tracks where we did completely rearrange it, and those are the ones that were a little bit tricky and a little bit difficult at times, wasn't it? Where it was maybe either stripping stuff in or maybe adding just that little bit of extra stuff, like just to fill gaps and things. But there's points where it does feel very, it is tricky to mix because there are very exposed instruments at times. So
Well, we've kind of segued into the mixing end. Did Steve Jr. No, that's good. That's perfect. All right. What I was going to say was that, but your people are not so familiar with you and your background. So, would you like to say a little bit about yourself as a musician? Where you started, what you do, because you do perform in another band. Just sort of, a little introduction to Steve Jr. for those who haven't encountered you before.
Okay, yeah. Not 100%, not great at bigging myself up, but yeah, I'll have a go.
This isn't a political stump. You can just be nice and you can be nice and factual about it.
Yeah, so obviously grown up around music,
So
whether I liked it or not.
Surprise me.
Yeah, who'd have thought? And what do I do now? Well, currently I'm in a lecture at a college teaching music production and mixing, mastering bands, recording bands, all that kind of stuff, live sound, and have done many different kind of projects in relation to that as I've been in my job and outside of my job. But as well as being a musician myself, so I'm a vocalist and a guitarist and been doing that for many years also. And growing up obviously with the Rebecca stuff going on and obviously listening to it and putting my 2 pence in every now and again when Dad's asked me his advice on things and helping him out with little tips and tricks. So I'm obviously completely aware of how the whole process works and what goes on. So that's really where I kind of come from background-wise and doing a lot of mixing and mastering for different bands really in different sort of styles and genres and the skill set that goes into that, aside from obviously just being a musician and playing an instrument also. So, yeah, have I?
So that's good. That's enough. Well, people know a lot about your dad, obviously, because they followed it. Well, one assumes they're following it if they're actually listening to this. But
yeah.
It's nice to introduce the new face, as it were. So you were invited to take over the role of the mixing. So how exactly did that work between the two of you then? How did you do it?
I'll very quickly finish off my bit. So all the different parts are recorded onto a program called Logic, and that means that all the things that could be there or could not be there, you can take them off as well as have them. Then go onto a file which goes straight over to Steve here, and then he can play those back, and then he can do his magic on it. Okay, so he's got the same system at home, and it's the same system that he works on at college. So it goes whizzing over to him, and off we go.
yeah, basically. Sorry, yeah. There's so much we do in our kind of sector as well. We just take for granted a lot of the time. I think, as we all know, then it's kind of like having to explain it. It's quite technical at times, but I'm sure people will find it fascinating to some extent. What?
So you get this track arrives with you. You
Sorry.
don't need to go through the every machination of it, but it kind of arrives with you in a raw form. And again, we've a bit, but I mean there'll be a little bit of a mix, won't there? Obviously, to make it palatable for Steve to think that he's actually completed his side of the task. So it arrives with you, and you go to work on it. At what point do you go back to him with something, and when you're happy with it, or do you go back and say, what do you think of this? What's the sort of, how's it knocked back and forward between the two of you?
Well, very much like that to some extent. When you're mixing and mastering, there's one thing that we like to look for kind of in the industry, and that's what I call a reference track. And that's basically having something that is your end game. Of you kind of going, well, I need it or want it to sound roughly like this, not identical. And there might be several sort of tracks that you're kind of aiming for and things like that. And that's kind of discussions that we kind of have go on, and it's stuff that when I'm listening to almost the demo forms of Dad's sending me, that I'm thinking, okay, where is this kind of going sonically? Really, how do I want this kind of to sound each particular instrument? And of course, there were some major names batted around and things, and there was. I think the first thing that Dad came to me was like, don't worry about it sounding like anything else. It's like they're all very different tracks. They will sound very different. And I was like, okay, cool, I get that, but I kind of need a reference a little bit. Like, it's just the way I work. I need that reference track to kind of bounce off. So we talked about stuff like Sting, for example. Sting's Brand New Day, fantastic album, like, amazing production. Like, listen to that album and you're sort of blown away with it, and you kind of go, right, well, I'm not going to get there. Do you know what I mean? I haven't got what Sting's got and the sort of production levels that they've got there. So you go, okay, but the thing about that album is every track is very different. It's sort of different arrangements, it's a different style. It does have some sort of sonic palette that carries through, but each one is quite different. You have to kind of treat it like a different entity. But then it was looking for stuff of similar ilk to what I was hearing in demo form. So, for example, I pulled out like Adele. So I was like, well, of course, we've got sort of string arrangement here, we've got sort of guitar parts, we've got something that's softer in sections, and maybe I'd listen to sort of parts of Adele's arrangement, especially for the string sort of stuff. But then I might shift to maybe someone like albums that I know Dad loves as well. That's the kind of beauty of working with each other. Like, obviously, I've grown up with him. A lot of my music taste comes from my dad. So I'm kind of like, I can see where you're going with this musically and what you kind of want, which really helps because I can almost see that vision. So I also looked at an album called Undiscovered by James Morrison as well, which I think I'd even mentioned to you when I said, I was like, oh, what about James Morrison and Undiscovered? And you're, oh yeah, it's a great album actually. And I go, well, again, that for the more lively tracks would be maybe the sort of sound that I think I can get us close to. So this is the thing, you start with having these reference tracks, these things to work off the back of, and that then gives you a bit of a goal to kind of go, what am I aiming for? It becomes like almost me having time to sit down and have a play then. To say, almost kind of go, okay, leave it with me, let me see what I can do, without going into really technical jargon, and then I'll send it back to you and see what you think.
Yeah. I mean, the basics of the technical jargon are things like getting the levels of the instruments and levels of the... This is like the basics of it all, of mixing. And also getting like the EQ, whether things are too bassy, too toppy and what have you, and getting it all to balance out. And obviously I've tried to do that in the demo, so then present it to Steve and he'll go, well, that particular bass sounds a bit too heavy. And what would happen is that he would have a look at it, and then we had about 2 or 3 sessions, long sessions, where we then collaborated, and he would tweak and he'd go, what do you think about that? And I'd go, yeah, or I'd go, no. And then it even came to the point where, and we'll give you an example of this later on, where we'd got a track and there was like too much going on. It'd like peak too early.
Again, that comes on to what I was almost saying earlier as well, that kind of extra era of production as well. But at the same time, I was sitting down and kind of go, yeah, it was cool, and we had it sonically sounding fantastic, and thinking, yeah, that's brilliant. But then, like you say, we sort of went, no, this maybe isn't how this track should be. Let's try something completely new, and we stripped off loads of bits and pieces and kind of took something in at the end where like, no, actually it should build up to that kind of crescendo level of sound. And that's a weird process to go through, because you've spent like a day kind of going, let's get this sounding great, it's well, then we could, hang on, oh wait, no, we don't like it and we want some of this, and then it comes back, but then when you get it back you go, oh no, that's much better, that is how that song should have sounded. And it is going through that kind of, that process really.
There's also the very long process. Okay, we've got some seriously good monitor speakers, but you also want to test it out, and this is when we also get on to mastering in the car. You want to test it out on your little Bluetooth speaker, on your earphones, and you want to make sure that it works well on all of those systems and what have you.
Well, and I mean, one of the things that came out of More Sinner Than Saint as well is the kind of spread of the sound as well, and where the instruments sit in your kind of head when you're listening to it, where they're positioned. Because if you know, some of it gets too compressed in the middle, and then there's some that you listen to where you've almost got the same guitar double tracked in each, you know, right at the very edges of each ear.
And that's really what mastering is. It's kind of thinking of this sound in almost like a 3D space, because you've got it's what someone spoke to me about, like, called like the audio pistol, where almost you make like a pistol with your finger, so you've kind of got your index finger is kind of pointing straight, so that's kind of like your depth, so how far back you sit in instruments to the listener and how far forward. Then if you've got your thumb up and you're making that pistol again, well, that's your level, so sort of how loud is something. And we've got tools obviously that can position those things in regards to that. And then of course, if you stick your middle finger out to the side like this, I just feel like I'm giving you a lesson now. That's our panning. So like you just said there, Colin, like that's where, is it coming within that space? Is it sort of right in front of us, or is it sort of quite wide? And as I say to a lot of my students, mixing really is like mixing a cake. A lot of the time it's that blend of those ingredients, and too much or too little of something, and you haven't got a very nice tasting cake at the end of it. And you start with the foundations and the bass a lot of the time, which of course would be like your drums and your bass and stuff, and then you build it up from there and put the icing on the cake with a bit of mastering.
Well, at least with this, you can go back and split it back into the ingredients again. You're not trying to get the eggs out of the cake, which is an expression that appeared over the last few years.
But that's sort of going backwards and forth with Steve does a mix, I have a listen to it, we then tweak it when it's not quite good. So we were able to do that quite easily, and that's a big advantage of working like
I think
this.
Also it's worth pointing out, as much as obviously we're father and son, if you hadn't have guessed, or son and father.
Yeah, whichever way you want it.
Yeah, whichever way you want it. He's absolutely brutal. there's no niceties at times. No, you are, you love what I do and you think I do a great job, otherwise you wouldn't have asked me to do it. But you know, it is very much a professional thing at times, where it's kind of like,
oh yeah,
no, I don't like that, and I'm like, oh. Okay, cool, that's fine, I can make that work for you. Do you know what I mean? There comes on that professional head of us kind of, there's proper professionalism to meet here, and we want a solid outcome from it in that sense. So, but that's good, because I think that's the way you need to work. It needs to challenge you. And
okay, that's great. So Steve, I know you wanted to sort of take us through some of the tracks and just talk a little bit about each one. So I guess given the time, we should move on to that.
Yeah, if we have a quick look, I'll just play some little teasers, little excerpts of different tracks that we've got things on them, and then we can maybe talk about mastering, because that is a different art in itself. So I've actually got all the tracks here in order, but little snippets of each one. So here's the opening track of the album, which is "Take Me Higher." Well, as you see, sounds very different from when we do it live, where we come out and that is a big, here we go, it's "Take Me Higher," okay, let's get down, etc. Thing about that is, I'm playing harmonica on that, and it's the sound that's on there is almost the same as that was on More Sinner Than Saint, but it's allowed me to get rawer, if you like. That's the sound that I wanted on Sinner. Didn't quite work because of the mixing, but that sort of quite dirty, bluesy, almost like a wail in the background going on.
Yeah.
And you can hear that this is this loop thing that we've got, a clap and do and do. So you can't have drums, but you can have a real funky loop going on. You know, this is sort of one of the beauties of working in this particular situation, and the mother of invention, if you like. So, "Take Me Higher." Any mixing thoughts on "Take Me Higher," Steve?
Again, that spatial thing, like some of the sort of reverbs that we used on kind of like on the on the harmonica and stuff, just to
Yeah,
get it
it's
sort of
got
just to drag slightly and not to be so dry. And
Yeah, yeah.
I think, I mean, the whole album was just to try and get a nice warmth to it a lot of the time. And as Dad's mentioned about obviously using loops and samples, for me, one of the big things was trying to get these loops and samples to almost not sound like loops and samples, which sounds weird and is quite tough, but there's things obviously we can do, add little bits of saturation and stuff that give it that slightly real vibe and still keep it raw rather than sounding overproduced, because I think a lot of the stuff on this, and that particularly, was like, we don't want it to sound overproduced.
No.
It should sound like it's got that kind of raw groove, which I think it has done. And I think, like you almost said, the stuff on the Sinner album, the actual Rocky Sinner album, the little features that Dad really wanted to bring out that were there, but it was almost like, there's a great little feature here that should almost just take a bit of focal point. I think the harp you said was one of those features.
You mentioned smoothing things out, and one of the things that you did a great job on is Rebecca's vocal. Now, Blues for Us, for example, we'll play a little bit of this. This is the single, second track on the album.
In the night I thought I'd lose you, maybe. Get up my head, no hurt remains. I put my faith behind the bar, but baby, in the morning it's the simple pain.
Just about to go into the chorus. That's a bit of a cheat, wasn't it? But you hear there a very different Rebecca Downs voice, don't you?
Very much so. And I think like this album really is a testament to Rebecca's skills as a vocalist. To obviously those who know her will know her as that really high energy rock vocalist that she does so well, but it's almost like, well, here's another string to her bow that she can do that really quite soulful style of vocal and that quite warm style of vocal. And I think it was just my job just to get that through even more. Do you know what I mean? Again, it's minimal things when you're mixing a lot of the time. All these little changes that you kind of do, and I think for a track like Blues for Us, I kept sort of using this analogy of like, I want it to feel a bit like a hot bath. Like a sort of like this nice warm bath-like feel, and you're like, oh, it feels great. There's nothing too sort of shrill there and everything, and of course, yes, there's that great sort of crescendo guitar part that's like, whoa, just to keep you kind of interested. These little kind of textures within the production and within Dad's arrangement that keep the listener interested. Yet with Blues to Us as well, there's this great almost R&B loop kind of going on drum-wise.
So maybe it's not such a surprise, that playlist.
Coming back to that, I'm not surprised for that kind of drum groove that's going through, because it is consistent throughout, and it's got that R&B soulful feel to it, while also kind of remaining somewhat, I don't know, acoustic as well. And
Okay, next track, Streets, Screaming Your Name.
Screaming your name. You're locked inside me, even though I can't breathe. All I want is you, and I'm screaming your name. It's over, can't get away.
And there you've got those strings I was talking about, which were you got me those strings. It's a sample from, was it a company called Labs or Spitfire Audio?
There's a company called Spitfire Audio. If they want to send us any free stuff, please do. But they're an amazing company, and they make probably some of the best string samples out there. So they do stuff like Hans Zimmer strings and stuff. And what these guys do when we talk about string samples is they will bring in, say, like Hans Zimmer's orchestra into a big space. They will mic it all up, and then they will convert these kind of samples of these strings into a playable instrument. And what you can hear happening on Screaming Your Name is basically the BBC Symphony Orchestra pack that's on there. And of course then you can play it in on a keyboard. but it's perfect samples of those people actually playing it, and it's been recorded.
I got a real kick of those double basses coming in at that point.
Yeah,
it was
it's nice to hear it again, actually.
There's no electric bass on that track because I didn't need it.
No.
I got this beautiful deep. Here we go.
And I think that was actually the first track that I mixed. That was the first one that I had an attempt at. So that was for me, that was the one that really took the most work because it was like I'm taking this from raw. And I think, again, coming back to that thing where you've, as much as sampled strings sound great, and that BBC Symphony Orchestra track sounds absolutely fantastic, there are times when you hear it raw that you kind of go, those are sampled strings to some extent. But a lot of the stuff that we can do in Logic is add those in the software that we use, is add those kind of like those extra little bits of expression, so it kind of comes in a bit more softly, and it kind of rises and falls at points, and it's kind of putting that into the recording as a mix engineer. So you listen to it, and it has that kind of ebb and flow. And I think another thing about that track particularly was trying to get Dad's vocal harmony in the chorus to give the whole thing a lift, because the arrangement doesn't necessarily change in those choruses, but you get this choral part come through, which when you're trying to do this on a small scale, you've got to kind of sometimes double up those vocals and things, add a spread, but then you don't want them to dominate Becky's fantastic chorus part that's coming over. You just want to bolster what she's doing, and I, blow my own trumpet, but I think it does that.
Oh, well. Next one is the band collaboration. Here you can hear it all. We've got Neil doing his brushes, which is sort of a little bit different to how you're used to hearing him. Vince doing his stuff on bass. They're doing some fantastic runs. And Aidan doing his piano bits. And there's a lovely little bit at the end that Nigel puts in. So I really got a kick out of putting all these parts together. Lovely. There goes Nige building up his part at the end. Fantastic. But that was the one that was most like doing a band mix, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah.
As it was.
We had full control on that one, a lot more, particularly with the drums, and of course, Vince doing his bass part and all those great Vince-isms again that I've grown up with, but again, there's so much detail in that track of everyone doing some lovely little bits of playing that, again, as a mix engineer, you're there going, I want to make sure that everyone, when I'm talking about that kind of space, everyone's got a space in the pocket of your ear that you could listen to, and you could pick up that particular instrument. No point do I think, I've tried not to make them clutter to kind of together. So it's like, you want to hear those bits where Nigel's kind of putting that little great organ part here and then. I think those bits kind of pop through, which is cool.
Excellent. Okay, next one, sailing. Now this is where we had to completely restructure sailing, and we'd already done it in the past. And it comes over, it's like, we can't do it as the massive, great big epic, so we're going to do it as like a Spanish guitar.
It's a cold night, I should hold you as you tell me the bad news that you like to wear.
So it's not the sailing on a pool of tears that people know, but it's taken on a completely different life of its own.
Yeah, I feel like, as well, having doing this, I've like forgotten what the original was. I had to go back to the original album and go, oh yeah, that's what it was.
It's true, yeah.
Well, Sailing is, by any means, the most popular song you've ever released. And it sits in a number of versions already, because we've got the original, we've got the live, we've got the Chris Kimsey remix, and now this is effectively version 4. So it'll be interesting to see what people make of it. I love that little when you do
A
that,
little harmonic.
When at the end and you do that, ding, it takes me back to my primary school orchestra, the triangle. You know?
Yeah,
You get the ding at the right point. Anyway, sorry.
But I think there's so many different versions of that as well. Like for me, it was kind of like, I can't do justice, you know, you got to do justice. And again, listening to the guitar on there, like we said a few moments ago, where you've got that exposed voice and you've got that exposed guitar, and you're looking for like two instruments just to fill up the space where you don't go, oh, it sounds thin. Do you know what I mean? There's so much complexity to acoustic guitar, but also leaving in that rawness. There's times on the acoustic guitar where I didn't want it to be pop polished, so to speak. You can hear the little strings squeaks. You can hear that kind of like that organic feel, and that was a word that we threw around a lot. Is kind of just keeping that organic feel to the songs and taking them back to that raw edge.
Yeah. So that was one approach, is that you strip it right back down to acoustics and strings and what have you. So the other approach to a song that's sort of a rip-roaring song is to make it funky. So slow it down and put a funky rhythm to it. And suddenly you get this idea, okay, this sounds funky, this sounds like a sort of gospel-y thing.
Yeah.
Let's put a gospel vocal in the background, you know, I won't leave here alone. Oh, God, you know,
That was it.
all the way.
It was all about getting that real church gospel feel, particularly towards the end when everything's coming in, everything's kind of going. And I think a big thing really, just listening back to that track, was kind of getting everyone to sound like they're all in the same room. You know, you want to get that church feel, like people listen to it, and you could almost clap along together. You want to join it, and it's like, how do I put it? It's almost heavy without being heavy.
Yeah. So that was great fun, and there's quite a lot of slide on there. I do love my slide guitar, and it was a chance to sort of bring that out a little bit more as well. So now there's a bit at the end of Sinner that I absolutely love, and we described this as sort of being out on the ranch. And just sort of clipping along, and this is where More Sinner Than Saint, which is a sort of almost poppy rock song, becomes country. And there you are, you're out on the prairie, aren't you? And you're just sort of trotting along, and it's like, well, hang on, what?
Again, that's one of those cases with tracks. When we're mixing any track, is one of the golden rules is where's the groove, where's the groove coming from, where's that instrumentation that's carrying that through, and it was essential to kind of get that groove to kind of come through and work, but without being dominant. You know what I mean? There's some great side stick on the drums there, where if you're not careful, that sort of stuff can really just pop through, and it becomes annoying without it just going, this is great.
Next track on the album is Washing All Over My Heart, but we'll probably do a separate thing on this, won't we? At some point.
Let's keep that one up our sleeve.
We'll keep that one up our sleeve.
Because that's the newbie, and it'll be. We're getting people on the radio asking to play, more than just blues for us, and I'm avoiding offering them that one.
It's not been long, is it?
Well, that comes out, on the 9th of April with the album, and it'd be nice for it to be new for people, particularly all those lovely people who pre-ordered it. Thank you very much for that.
Excellent. Wonderful.
Okay, next one is Believe then, and this is basically what we did with a sort of gospel choir type thing. I'm going to be very tempted to throw some of this vocal into our next live gig.
Stomp.
Yeah. I keep singing Maybe It's Maybelline to that.
Yeah.
You just can't resist it. But I mean, there you go. It's become like a gospel thing. It really has, that one.
Yeah, it is. And
Well, you
there's
probably just pinched another one of my misheard lyrics for the competition with that one. But there is one that I've got already up my sleeve, which I won't do a spoiler with just now. But we may have a little competition on the latest misheard lyric.
I think just lastly on that with the vocals again, because this album was recorded in lockdown. It was recorded under all these awful constraints and stuff. Was doubling all those vocals up, which literally where the vocals were Dad and Becky, and then several harmony parts, but making it sound so thick and textured on there, for what normally would be maybe a choir or something.
Right. Here's the end of Night Train, and I'll tell you a little story about the harmonica on this. So that lingering harmonica that you can hear in the background is an old harmonica that my uncle left for me, and it's a chromatic harmonica. It's one of the ones that Stevie Wonder plays with it. It's got all the notes on it, so you can't cheat like a blues harmonica. It's already
there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's up there. That's right. For people who are watching in YouTube,
You've got a visual aid.
Yeah, don't ask me to play it because I played one a few bits. Yeah, so I thought, the only way I'm going to be able to play this is to use one of these things. And I got it out and it was knackered. It was all over the place. It was all seized up and whatever. So all of a sudden I became a repair shop.
The best shop.
I took it all
TV
apart. Yeah, and I was thinking, if the metalwork man or the clockwork man got hold of this, he'd be proud of what I'm doing. And I've got a little bit of silver foil to block off one of the things. And yeah, this is that chromatic harmonica that my uncle left for me. It was the only way I could actually play in that little bit of harp. It's a wonderful harmonica.
You didn't inhale too much WD-40 after.
I probably did actually.
It's probably given a timbre to your voice that will never be recaptured without having a swig of it before going on.
Yeah. Now we talked about drum loops as well. Now the drum loop that we based this next song, "Come With Me Baby," on was actually a Steve Jordan loop from a John Mayer gig. Was it Nokia Arena?
Yes, it's John Mayer.
Vultures.
Nokia Arena. Start of Vultures.
And we copied it basically. I mean, I'd actually sampled him and looped it.
Yeah, because you'd used it for obviously the lockdown sessions that you did over Zoom, which was great for that. And then you sampled it and used it for the demo, but you'd ran it alongside a drum track doing the similar sort of thing and kind of blend it together. And I think one of the things I sort of said in was, well, let's see how good we can get just the actual MIDI drum track, the actual drum part, to sound as much like the Steve Jordan one that you've looped and sample and taken that sample from. And in the end, really, we used very little of the Steve Jordan one. It just sort of sat underneath, just slightly underpinning it and adding that extra little bit of texture again to the sound. But a lot of what you hear there was our kind of reimagination of it, shall we say.
I mean, it does sort of using that loop gives it a different groove again, doesn't it, compared to the original?
And that song is probably the one, if you went back through your repertoire and had in mind an album of this type, I guess that's probably the one that would be easiest to convert in a way, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean,
you talk about your reference points. I'm not thinking about it for sonically, but just like for the feel of it. It's, "Come With Me Baby" is always sat sort of on the edge of what you do.
Yeah.
And kind of it's a sort of bridging point into some of this at least.
Yeah, I mean, really, in terms of recording it was just a case of replacing the electric keyboard with electric piano keyboard with an acoustic guitar, which I thought would work and then redoing the lead guitar part, because Norman Beaker did the lead guitar part on the original. And then just keeping that groove going. It's almost a Billie Jean thing.
Yeah.
It's almost that.
Yeah.
And he rode up. Anyway, last track, and there's another one of these sample things coming up here that I'll talk about. And the last track was With Me, which is just a wonderful song. You're not even going to get Beck singing on that bit, so it's just the intro. And the sound that if you get the album, or when you get the album, turn that start up, because there's this haunting sound that's going on in the background, and it's another one of these samples from the Spitfire audio. And what they did, they sampled instruments and orchestras and what have you, and they put it onto, they dug out old tapes that had been sort of mangled up, cassette tapes, reel-to-reel tapes, and re-recorded them with all of that sort of scratchy. It just has an amazing atmosphere, doesn't it? It was perfect.
Yeah, and I think we discovered it like midway through doing this album.
Yeah.
And I remember finding it and sending it to Dad, going, "You've got to hear this tape orchestra thing. It sounds absolutely brilliant." And then luckily, this track came about, and there was a similar sound on there, and we were like, "Oh, what if we can use that great tape orchestra stuff to just replace that sound that you used originally?" We tried it, and it was like, oh my god, yeah, that's got all those extra little bits and pieces that it was needing and requiring from the track. I mean, as Dad just said, if you've bought the album, and hopefully you have, that's a real treat of a song, and I can't wait for you to hear that one on all the way through. That was also the one that was really tricky, where it didn't start off how it ended up. That was the one where there was almost like a full drum track going through it, and it was a lot more lively and things, and then we sort of got to the end of a session and went, actually, no. And you'll find that the drums sort of come in towards the end, and it gives it that final lift into the last chorus, and you're almost like crying out for those drums to kind of come in, and when they do, well, for me, I was like, oh, yeah, that's nailed it, and that probably is one of my favourite tracks, if not my favourite track on the album.
So tell us a little bit about, in the final phase of this, tell us a little bit about the mastering and what that involved, because you've got a very mixed bag of tracks there, haven't you? And in terms of sort of bringing it into a cohesive whole, that must have been quite a challenge.
Yeah. See, this was your. By this stage, I'd had a bloody enough of it all. Just pass it on to him. Go on, you sort all this out now.
Oh, okay. So, mastering. Well, what is it really? What differs between mixing and mastering? And mastering really is the final stage of preparing audio for distribution. You're preparing it for distribution. So you have to consider, obviously, the level that everything's sat at. And at this point, we're not talking individual instruments. We're talking about all of those instruments together as one, just a stereo left and right, and making sure that everything really is coherent across listening platforms and across different forms of listening mediums, whether that be sort of in earbuds or hi-fi stereos or cars or whatever. And it's a bit of a nightmare, to be honest with you. It's what I kind of describe as, come back to that kind of cake analogy. It's that thing of going, right, you've got a great cake, that looks good, like some sort of bake-off thing. Oh, that's a lovely cake. But what happens if we just sort of sprinkle some hundreds and thousands on the top? And you go, oh my God, now it's an amazing cake. And you go, yeah, there you go, that's what it was missing. That's kind of what mastering is. It's almost like you wouldn't know it's kind of happening, but it's happened. If it hadn't happened, you'd miss it. And it's really making very subtle, very delicate changes to the complete track to get it prepared for distribution, and setting levels for all those different mediums that I just mentioned. I must admit, that was the most trickiest part for me. A lot of the time you send it off to a mastering engineer, and sometimes a separate engineer from yourself who hasn't worked on the mix, who have very kind of clean, sonically prepared spaces. So that was where I I was having to use all of my skills and all of my tools to kind of almost forget the tracks and try to view it from a different light, and then run all of those tests, run kind of like car tests, bring it round here, put it on like, you know, Dad's like hi-fi and stuff that he's used to kind of working on, take it back, and it kind of goes through several motions of listening, and you need time. Time is really the one with that, to kind of do something, go, I'm happy with that, and now I need to come away from it for a day or so, and then go back to it and with almost fresh ears and go, yeah, actually that bit is a little bit loud.
And this is why you have very specialist mastering engineers, don't you? You know, mastering studio people, because it's a specialised job.
But the other beauty of doing it yourself is the fact, like, sometimes you might send something to master engineer and they might bat something back to you and kind of go, actually, I need you to change the mix. Or because I've done the mix as well, I was able to kind of go in and kind of go, actually, that instrument individually needs to just come down. And we're talking minimal. Again, that 100,000 things. They're tiny little things that you can put on a cake, but they just add that decoration. And that's it really. And then of course you're trying to line up tracks that you've worked on individually so they sound coherent all the way through, level wise, as well as adding that slight sonic coherence, even though they are different.
So there you go.
Well, I mean, you know, somebody who's been fortunate enough to listen to it more than once, obviously, you've done a stonking job, and thank you both very much.
Thank you very much.
And just to say as well, thank you very much for going through that. Now, Rebecca was being rather rude about this in the previous episode. Kept mentioning the word mansplaining.
Mansplaining?
I don't know what that is.
No, I don't
understand. I know, I didn't think you would, but that to me was anything but. That's been a really interesting insight, certainly for me personally, to sit and listen to it, because I'm not steeped in this, as you know. And I hope our audience enjoys it as much as I have, because it's been a very interesting, very enlightening. It has been a very different approach to making an album for us.
Well, it's had to be.
It's had to be, I think, you know, it's shown a lot of resourcefulness, really. But we, you know, we've collectively enjoyed it, and I think we're going to be doing some more of it, aren't we? You know, without going into any details, but you know, this approach seems to work for us, and we think it's got potential to enable us to get stuff out more quickly, and you know, maybe do a little bit of further experimentation in terms of different sounds and things. But it's it's a great album. I've thoroughly enjoyed it and will continue to enjoy it. It's certainly added something to the repertoire, and as I said, thank you to all of those who've ordered it thus far. If you haven't got round to doing so already, please do. I think that brings us neatly to the end of it. So to Steve Senior, thank you very much.
Cheers, Colin.
Steve Junior, thank you very much.
Cheers everybody out there for watching and listening.
Yes, thank you everybody for listening, and we will be back with you again very soon.
Excellent.
Just blues are